every single one of them needs to get out of the water, right now!
That's what she screamed at my friend's kids from the end of my dock, pointing at 6 children who were mid-cannonball off the platform my grandfather built. I walked out of the house still holding my coffee and watched Darlene Fitch, HOA president, self-appointed lake warden, wave her clipboard at a 12-year-old like she had the authority of a federal marshal. She was demanding lake access permits, $75 a head. She had a system, a website, 6 years of collected fees, and complete certainty that this lake belonged to her. What she didn't know was that I'd grown up on that water, that my grandfather had built this entire subdivision, and that every inch of the shoreline, every dock, every beach, every launch ramp, was still titled to my family's trust. I didn't argue with her that morning. I let her finish. Then I made a phone call. Tell me below, would you have shut her down on the spot or started building your case? Let me tell you about Harmon Lake. It sits in a fold of the Adirondack foothills, about 40 minutes north of Saratoga Springs, New York. One of those places where the pines come right down to the water, and the mornings smell like cold granite and wood smoke. 63 acres of clear, spring-fed lake. The kind of water that turns copper at sunset and makes you forget you ever had a bad day. My grandfather, Earl Calloway, founded in 1958. He was a civil engineer, practical, methodical, not the sentimental type. But he took one look at that lake and decided it was worth every dollar he had. He bought the land, platted the subdivision, sold off the individual lots one by one through the 1960s and 70s, and built Clearwater Pines into a real community of about 200 homes. But Earl was nobody's fool. When he drew up that original 1962 plat map, he sold the lots, but he kept the shoreline, every inch of it. A 40-foot wide strip of land running all the way around Harmon Lake, high water mark to 40 feet inland, 1,847 linear feet of it, was retained by the Calloway Family Trust. No exceptions, no transfers. It was written right there in the deed covenants, plain as anything, for anyone willing to read. I grew up summering at this lake. So did my mother. So did my daughter Maya, who was 13 when this story happened, and had the good sense to film most of it on her phone. My name is Reed Calloway. I'm 52 years old. I spent 30 years as a civil engineer. Roads, drainage systems, land use planning. And for the last several years, I've worked part-time as a land use consultant. I know how to read a deed. I know how to read a plat map. I know what a meets and bounds description means and why it matters. What I didn't expect was needing that knowledge to defend my own property from the HOA president of the very subdivision my grandfather built. Darlene Fitch had moved to Clearwater Pines 6 years before all of this. She was in her late 40s, blonde, heavy-set, always turned out in pressed linen like she was managing a boutique hotel rather than a neighborhood. She'd run for HOA president her second year in the community. Nobody else wanted the job, and had been re-electing herself ever since. The kind of woman who schedules board meetings on Tuesday mornings, knowing most working residents can't make it. She had a good thing going for a while. She standardized the mailbox colors. She fined people for the wrong length of grass. And somewhere along the line, she decided that Harmon Lake was her personal domain. She started what she called the Lake Access Permit Program. Residents had to buy annual permits to use the lake, $75 per household. Guests required separate per-visit permits at $75 apiece, purchased through a website she'd built using HOA dues. If you didn't have a permit, Darlene or her treasurer Paul would show up in a golf cart and escort you off the waterfront. Over 6 years, she had collected $34,000 from a lake she didn't own. The week before the 4th of July, I called 8 of my closest friends, college buddies and their families, and invited them to spend the holiday weekend at the lake. 21 people total, including 6 kids under 12. We planned to kayak, fish off the dock, grill on the porch, and watch the fireworks from the water. It was going to be a perfect weekend. Then Darlene found out I hadn't bought guest permits. She arrived at 10:15 on Saturday morning. I heard the golf cart before I saw it, that particular whine of a cheap electric motor pushing more authority than it was designed to carry. Darlene came around the bend in the access road with Paul, the treasurer, riding shotgun. Paul was a pale, nervous man who had the energy of someone who'd been voluntold into his position and was too polite to resign. He held a clipboard. Darlene had a walkie-talkie. The kids were already in the water. 2 of them were racing kayaks toward the center of the lake. 3 more were on the floating dock my grandfather built, cannonballing off the edge with the reliable enthusiasm of children who don't know yet how fast summer ends. The adults were on the porch drinking coffee and pretending we were 25 again. Darlene walked down the dock like she owned it, which, to be very clear, she did not. She put 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled at the kids in the water. "Excuse me, all of you, out of the lake, right now." My friend Garrett came off the porch. "I'm sorry, who exactly are you?" "I'm the HOA president," she said, as if that explained everything in the universe. "And none of these people have guest lake access permits. They need to clear the water and vacate the waterfront immediately." I walked down to the dock at that point. I kept my voice level. I asked her to show me the rule. She pulled out the HOA handbook, a laminated, spiral-bound document she apparently carried everywhere, and pointed to section 14.7. Non-resident guests using community lake facilities are required to obtain a day-use access permit. $75 per person, per visit, available on the HOA website. I said, "Okay, and which document gives the HOA jurisdiction over the lake itself?" She looked at me the way people look at a question they've never once been asked before, like it was a strange and mildly offensive thing to say. "Everyone knows the HOA manages the lake," she said. "Sure," I said, "but which document says that? The Declaration of Covenants? The recorded plat? A deed? Which one?" Paul looked at his clipboard. Darlene looked at Paul. Neither one of them said anything useful. "I'm going to need to see that document," I said, "because section 14.7 of your handbook says community lake facilities. But the question I'm asking is whether the HOA actually owns the lake, and I have reason to believe it doesn't." Darlene's expression shifted from authority to irritation. "Mr. Calloway, I don't know what you're implying. This has been the policy for 6 years, and nobody has had a problem with it." "Nobody's asked the right questions before," I said. She told me I had 24 hours to purchase guest permits for everyone on my property, or she'd file a formal HOA violation. $75 times 20 guests, $1,500, or a $250 fine. She was also placing the matter before the full board. I said, "That's fine, go ahead." She blinked. She hadn't expected that. "In the meantime," I added, "I'm going to pull the deed records on this property and the original plat documentation. If I find what I think I'm going to find, we'll be having a very different conversation." Darlene laughed, this short, dismissive sound, and told me I was welcome to waste my weekend on paperwork. Then she climbed back on the golf cart, said something quietly to Paul, and rolled away. I stood on the dock for a moment. The pine smell was coming off the trees in the heat. 2 of the kids had resumed their kayak race. Garrett walked up behind me and said quietly, "What was that about?" "Old paperwork," I said. "My grandfather's paperwork." The thing is, I already knew, in the back of my mind, what I was going to find. I'd read those documents before. I just needed to confirm I was remembering them correctly. That afternoon, I made some calls. Mini twist. I already knew the HOA had no deed-recorded authority over that shoreline. I'd read the original plat covenants years earlier and never forgotten what they said. Darlene had just picked the wrong family to push. The violation notice arrived Monday morning, certified mail. She'd sent it over the holiday weekend, which meant she'd spent part of her 4th of July drafting official-sounding letters. Formal notice of HOA violation. Section 14.7. Unauthorized guest lake access. $250, due within 30 days. Failure to pay would result in a lien on my property. There was also a second document enclosed, a notice of a special board meeting, called for the following Thursday. The stated agenda item was community lake integrity and resident compliance. A polite way of saying, we're going to make an example of Reed Calloway. I wasn't surprised. But what she did next caught me a little off guard. She sent a mass email to all 200 households in Clearwater Pines. Subject line, important community notice, lake access violations. It described, without using my name directly, but making it obvious who she meant, how an unnamed resident had deliberately allowed unauthorized guests to use HOA lake facilities and refused to cooperate with board authority. She called it a threat to the community standards we've all worked hard to maintain. By Tuesday morning, I had 11 text messages from neighbors. Most were curious or sympathetic. 2 were from people who'd received similar permit demands in the past and had paid without questioning it. Then Darlene did something that made me decide I was completely done being patient. She had Paul place orange construction cones along the edge of my dock access path. 4 cones, a length of yellow caution tape, and a handwritten sign that read, "Waterfront under HOA maintenance review. No public access." She claimed it was a routine inspection zone. My dock, my property, her cones. I walked down, moved the cones to the side of the road, folded the caution tape, and stacked everything neatly by the mailbox. Then I called the county clerk's office and requested certified copies of 3 documents: the original 1962 plat map for Clearwater Pines, the deed records for what the plat designated as Lot 0, and the property tax records for Lot 0, going back as far as they had available. The clerk told me the records would be ready in 3 to 5 business days. I said I'd be there Thursday morning, right after the HOA board meeting. The meeting room was set up like a hearing. Darlene sat at the head of a folding table with Paul and 2 other board members flanking her. About 30 residents had shown up, most of them just curious to see what the drama was about. A few were the kind of people who enjoy community conflict, the way some people enjoy bowling leagues. Darlene laid out her case. I had violated Section 14.7. I had failed to purchase permits. I had removed official HOA signage, meaning the cones, and owed the original fine, plus an additional fine for interference with board property. Then she opened the floor for my response. I stood up and said 3 sentences. I'm requesting, in writing, a copy of the deed or recorded document that grants the HOA ownership of or jurisdiction over the lake and its shoreline. Until that document is produced, I'm not paying any fine related to lake access, because you may not have the legal authority to issue one. And I'd encourage everyone in this room to think carefully about what you're being asked to vote on tonight. Darlene told me the HOA's authority was self-evident and had been established by community custom for years. I asked if community custom was legally the same as a recorded deed. She said the board would vote to uphold the violation. They voted 4 to 1. The one dissenting vote was a retired school teacher named Norbert, who'd lived in Clearwater Pines since 1978, and apparently had some memory of how the original subdivision had actually been set up. After the meeting, Norbert found me in the parking lot. He shook my hand, a slow, deliberate handshake from a man who didn't waste the gesture. He said, "Your grandfather kept the water, didn't he?" "That's what I'm going to confirm for certain on Thursday," I said. Norbert nodded slowly, like a man who already knows the answer to a question and is just waiting for you to catch up. He was right. I already knew it too. I just needed the documents in hand before I made my next move. Thursday morning, I drove to the county clerk's office in my truck with a thermos of coffee and a yellow legal pad. The certified records were waiting in a manila envelope at the front desk. I spread them out on one of the public reference tables and went through them the way I'd been trained, methodically, slowly, starting from the original instrument and working forward in time. The 1962 plat map was a large format blueprint, copied onto archival paper, showing the original subdivision layout of Clearwater Pines. Every lot was numbered, every road was named, every easement was shown in a fine, clean hand. And there, surrounding Harmon Lake, was a clearly delineated strip of land labeled Lot 0, retained by grantor, Callaway Family Trust, not for conveyance. The deed records for Lot 0 confirmed the full chain. My grandfather had never sold it. My father had inherited it. I had inherited it as trustee 6 years ago when my father passed. Every year without fail, the property tax bill for Lot 0, assessed at just under $40,000, had been mailed to and paid by the Callaway Family Trust. 64 years of property taxes, 64 years of ownership, documented, recorded, uninterrupted. I sat back in that chair and let the full weight of it settle over me, like the cold air in that room. The HOA's community beach, the one with the picnic tables and the swimming float, sat entirely on Lot 0. The boat launch sat on Lot 0. The fishing pier at the north end of the lake sat on Lot 0. The dock access pads for every home on the lakeside crossed Lot 0. And Darlene's own private dock, the one she'd had rebuilt 2 summers ago, with composite decking and built-in solar lighting, sat entirely on land owned by the Callaway Family Trust. She'd been using my property to build her dock, and then charging other people to use my property to get to theirs. Now, here's the part that non-lawyers sometimes find surprising, so let me lay it out plainly. The HOA had what's called a prescriptive use issue. They'd been openly using Lot 0 for decades, with what appeared to be the trust's passive permission. In some states, that kind of long-term use can give rise to a prescriptive easement, meaning the other party might argue a right to use the land even without owning it. But a prescriptive easement gives you the right to use land. It does not give you the right to charge other people for access to it. It does not give you the right to issue permits, collect fees, or exclude the landowner's guests. And it absolutely does not give you the right to fine the landowner for using his own property. That's the line Darlene had crossed, and she had been crossing it for 6 years. One sentence version: using someone else's land for a long time earns you a right to use it, not a right to profit from it. I took photographs of everything. I made certified copies. I drove home. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and watched the lake go copper in the last light. The smell of pine resin hung in the warm air, and somewhere out in the center of the lake, a fish jumped. A family of mergansers, mother and 7 ducklings, came around the bend near the south shore and moved in their quiet, purposeful line along the water. Lot 0. My land. My grandfather's decision in the winter of 1962, drawing that plat on a drafting table somewhere in upstate New York, deciding to hold that strip back, whether he did it for love of the water, or practical caution, or just because he was an engineer who liked to keep things clean and clear, I'd never know. He was gone before I was old enough to ask the right questions. But sitting there, watching those ducks move across the copper surface, I was very glad he made that call. Mini twist. The same documents that proved Darlene had no authority also proved that her own dock, the one she'd just renovated at significant personal expense, was sitting on land she didn't own. She had encroached on my family's property, and she had been selling permits to do the same. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Chen. Patricia Chen was a real estate attorney out of Saratoga Springs. Mid-50s, no nonsense, the kind of lawyer who speaks in plain sentences and doesn't pad her billable hours with things that don't matter. A friend had recommended her years earlier. I'd used her once before for a land use question on a consulting project. She picked up on the second ring. I told her what I had. She was quiet for a moment. Then, send me the plat, the Lot 0 deed chain, and the tax records. Everything. I emailed the scans that night. She called me back the next morning at 8:15. Okay, here's where you stand. The Callaway Family Trust has clean, uninterrupted title to Lot 0. No gaps in the deed chain. No competing claims on record. 64 years of consecutive tax payment is very strong evidence of ownership intent. If they try to argue adverse possession, that's the theory where someone claims title by long-term use. They won't succeed. Adverse possession requires use that is hostile, meaning without the owner's permission. But the HOA's own founding documents contain a specific line. She paused. I need you to hear this. Their CC and Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions recorded back in 1974, say, lake access provided courtesy of the Callaway Family Trust. That's a permission acknowledgement. It means the community always knew who owned the shoreline. It destroys any adverse possession argument they might make, because their own founding document admits they were using the land by permission, not by right. That one line. Sitting in the HOA's own founding documents for over 50 years. Darlene had simply never read her own paperwork carefully enough to find it. Patricia continued. What they've been doing with the permit program, collecting fees for access to land they don't own, that's a serious problem for them. Depending on how you frame it, it could be characterized as unauthorized fee collection, unjust enrichment, or, in the worst scenario for them, fraud. $34,000 over 6 years, under false authority. I let that sit for a second. What are my options? I asked. You have several good ones. You can file a quiet title action. That's a court proceeding where a judge formally confirms the trust's ownership on the public record, permanently. You simultaneously send a cease and desist to the HOA demanding they end the permit program and refund all fees. You also send notice to each individual dock owner explaining the situation. Their docks are technically encroachments, but we handle that gently. We offer them free license agreements. I want to be as low conflict as possible with the neighbors, I said. Most of them just paid what they were told to pay. They didn't design this scheme. That's the right instinct, Patricia said. The neighbors are your allies. Darlene is your problem. What's the strongest move? I asked. File the quiet title action. Under New York law, it gets published in the county legal notices for 3 consecutive weeks. The moment that runs, every real estate attorney in the county sees it. Any homeowner trying to sell or refinance hits a title question. That alone puts enormous pressure on the HOA to settle quickly. You do it alongside the cease and desist, and Darlene's position falls apart. "Let's do it," I said. "Give me 2 weeks," she said. I told her I could wait 2 weeks. I'd been waiting my whole life, or at least since the 4th of July. The next 2 weeks were the busiest stretch of paperwork I dealt with since my days engineering drainage systems for the State Highway Department. And that is saying something. Patricia filed the quiet title action in Saratoga County Supreme Court the following Wednesday. Under New York law, a quiet title proceeding must be published in the official county legal notices, which meant it ran in the Saratoga County Gazette for 3 consecutive weeks. Here's how quiet title works, because it's one of those legal tools most people have never heard of, but ought to know about. The plaintiff, in this case the Callaway Family Trust, asks the court to issue a formal order confirming ownership of a specific parcel. The court gives all potential claimants a window to come forward and contest it. If nobody can produce a stronger claim, the judge confirms the plaintiff's title, and that order goes onto the public record permanently. It is, in practical terms, the legal equivalent of staking a flag in the ground and having a federal judge sign off on it. No one challenges it again without extraordinary cause. While Patricia handled the court filing, I hired a licensed land surveyor named Warren Stills, 28 years of boundary work in that county, the kind of man who carries a worn field notebook and doesn't waste words. Warren spent 2 full days walking the Lot 0 boundary, checking the 1962 plat against current physical monuments, and restaking the corners with orange-flagged survey pins. By the time he was done, there were 43 flags running along the lakeshore in both directions from my dock. 43 little orange flags, visible from the road, from the water, and from the window of anyone living within 100 yards of the lake. Darlene drove past that flag line 3 times in one afternoon. I know because my neighbor Dave texted me each time it happened, and because Dave had been waiting for an excuse to text someone about Darlene for approximately 4 years. Patricia then drafted the cease and desist letter, 7 pages. It documented the Callaway Trust's full title history, identified the absence of any deed-recorded authority, giving the HOA jurisdiction over Lot 0, cataloged the 6-year permit program and the $34,000 collected, and formally demanded 3 things: immediate end to the permit program, written acknowledgement that the HOA held no authority over the shoreline, and full refund of all fees collected since inception. The letter cited 3 specific legal principles. First, unjust enrichment, the doctrine that says you cannot keep money you received without a legal right to collect it, even without deliberate fraud. Second, ultra vires action, the principle that an organization, including an HOA board, can only act within the limits of its recorded governing documents. HOA authority ends exactly where those documents say it ends, not 1 inch further. Third, trespass to land, which applies when someone uses another person's property without permission or legal right, which the HOA had been doing every time it erected signage or conducted official activities on Lot 0. Simultaneously, I drafted the Harmon Lake Community License Agreement, a simple 2-page document prepared for every dock-owning homeowner in Clearwater Pines. It acknowledged the Callaway Trust's ownership of Lot 0. It granted each homeowner a permanent, free, transferable license to maintain and use their existing dock in its current location. And it included a community use provision. All residents and their guests could use the lakeshore for swimming, fishing, and non-motorized watercraft, at any time, free of charge, with no permits required, ever. I sent it certified mail to 47 households. With a handwritten cover note, "My grandfather built this community. I have no interest in disrupting it. Please read this, consult your attorney if you'd like, and reach out with any questions." There was nothing threatening in that letter. No deadline, no legal language, no posturing, just the facts and an offer. Within 10 days, 31 of the 47 had signed and returned it. The other 16 were watching, waiting to see what happened when Darlene finally had to face the documentation in a room full of her neighbors. That room was coming. The annual HOA summer meeting was 6 weeks away. Patricia circled August 6th on my calendar and told me to be patient. I told her patience was one thing I had plenty of. That and a very good plat map. Darlene did not take the cease and desist quietly. Within 4 days of receiving it, she called an emergency board meeting and voted, 3-1, with Norbert again dissenting, to authorize the HOA to retain legal counsel and pursue all available remedies against the Callaway Family Trust. She hired an attorney named Grover Pratt from a general practice firm in the next town over, who, based on what followed, had apparently not been given the full picture before he sent his first letter. Grover's response to Patricia's cease and desist argued, with some confidence, that the HOA had established prescriptive rights over the shoreline through decades of continuous use, and that the trust's claims were speculative and unsupported. Patricia read it, smiled, and wrote back with a single highlighted excerpt. Lake access provided courtesy of the Callaway Family Trust, lifted directly from the HOA's own founding CC&Rs, drafted in 1974. The response from Grover Pratt's office took 9 days. It was noticeably shorter than his first letter. But while the attorneys were exchanging documents, Darlene was fighting the war she actually knew how to fight. The social war. She launched a campaign on the Clearwater Pines neighborhood Facebook group. She posted 3 times in 1 week. The first post accused me of weaponizing a legal technicality to seize community resources. The second called the quiet title action a legal attack on our shared way of life. The third claimed, without any evidence, that the original plat documents might be outdated or improperly recorded, and urged residents not to be alarmed. Alarming people, clearly, was her job. She also printed physical flyers and left them in the mailboxes of the 15 homeowners who hadn't yet signed my license agreement, urging them not to sign anything until the board resolved the situation. 3 of those 15 called me directly after receiving the flyer. One of them was a retired contractor named Birch, who had lived in Clearwater Pines since 1989, and had the dry, considered calm of a man who had built enough things to know when something wasn't structurally sound. He told me, "I always wondered how she got the authority to run that permit program. Nobody ever showed me a deed. I just paid because she said to." He signed the license agreement before we got off the phone. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Darlene also contacted the Saratoga Springs Tribune and gave them a story. The headline, when it ran, read, "Clearwater Pines resident claims ownership of community lakefront." She had framed it as a neighbor dispute, a greedy landowner trying to take what the community had built together. The reporter called me for comment. I gave him 3 things: a copy of the 1962 plat map, a summary of 64 consecutive years of property tax receipts, and a brief statement that said, "The Callaway Family Trust has owned Lot 0 since the land was first platted. We are happy to discuss the full documentary record with anyone who would like to review it." The reporter ran both sides, as reporters do. But the tax records, 64 years of them, all public documents, were reprinted in the article alongside a scan of the original plat map. Anyone who read it carefully could follow the ownership trail without needing a lawyer to explain it. The comment section beneath the online article was not kind to Darlene. Mini twist. The newspaper article that Darlene intended to run as a smear campaign ended up reprinting 64 years of Callaway tax records and the original plat map, the 2 most damaging documents to her position, and put them in front of the entire county. 3 weeks after the cease and desist went out, Darlene did something I genuinely did not see coming. She filed a complaint with the Saratoga County Sheriff's Department. The complaint alleged that I was blocking public access to a navigable waterway by claiming private ownership of Shoreline used by the public for over 60 years. She attached a copy of a printed map she had made herself, not the official plat, but her own version, on which she had colored in the Lot 0 boundary in red marker and labeled it Disputed Territory. 2 deputies came out on a Tuesday afternoon. They were professional, thorough, and visibly puzzled about why they were there. I showed them the deed, the plat, the tax records, and the quiet title filing. I showed them Lot 0's tax parcel number on the county assessor's public website. It took about 45 seconds on a phone to pull up. One of the deputies looked at the screen, looked at my plat map, looked at his partner, and said, "I think we're done here." They left. I never heard from them again about it. But the sheriff visit had one unintended consequence. It made the quiet title action more visible. Neighbors had noticed the deputies. When a few of them looked up the legal notice in the Gazette, which is freely searchable online, they found the full text of the quiet title filing, laying out the trust's ownership history in plain legal language. Around this time, Patricia told me something important. Grover Pratt had quietly asked her, off the record, whether there was a path to resolution that didn't involve further litigation. She told him yes, and that the path was the Harmon Lake Community Charter I'd been circulating. Darlene, apparently, had not authorized Pratt to explore settlement. She was still convinced she could win. She held one more board meeting. She proposed that the HOA file for a declaratory judgment asserting community ownership of the lake. She put it to a vote. The vote was 2-2. Two board members, including one who had quietly supported her for years, refused to vote yes. The motion failed. I found out about that vote from Norbert, who sent me a text message that said simply, "The tide just turned." It had. By that point, 39 of the 47 dock owners had signed the license agreement. The quiet title notice had run in the Gazette for the second of its 3 required weeks, and Grover Pratt, according to Patricia, had been unable to locate a single recorded document supporting the HOA's claim to authority over Lot 0. Not one. Patricia had also filed a formal complaint with the county attorney's office regarding the permit fee program, noting that $34,000 had been collected under false authority over 6 years. The county attorney's office confirmed receipt and said they would review it. I asked Patricia, "Is she going to keep fighting all the way to August?" Patricia said, "Probably, right up until the moment she's in a room full of her neighbors and has to face the documents in public." "When's the annual summer meeting?" I asked. "August 6th, she said. Outdoor pavilion on the East Shore. Usually about 60 residents attend." I said, "Let's make sure this year's attendance is a little higher than usual." Patricia smiled. "Already ahead of you. I've been suggesting to a few of the license agreement signatories that it might be a good meeting to come to." Mini twist. By the time the summer meeting arrived, Darlene's own attorney had privately told her the HOA had no viable legal claim, but she had already burned every bridge that might have allowed a quiet, private resolution. The only place left for this to end was in public. I bought a large format printer cartridge. I rolled up the 1962 plat map into a cardboard tube. I packed a box. August 6th was going to be a very interesting evening. The annual HOA summer meeting was held at the outdoor pavilion on the East Shore, a covered wooden structure with picnic tables and a long view straight down the lake. It was a hot, clear evening in early August. The water was pewter-colored in the fading light and smelled faintly of warm stone and pine. About 112 residents showed up, which was roughly double the usual attendance. Word had gotten around. Darlene had arranged the front of the pavilion like a podium setup, herself on one side, Paul and one remaining supportive board member on the other, a folding table between them. She had a printed agenda, a portable projector screen, and the bearing of a woman who had prepared extensively for something she was still going to lose. I arrived with Patricia, Warren the surveyor, and a rolled-up large format print of the 1962 plat map under my arm. The cardboard box went on the bench beside me. We sat at the back. Darlene opened the meeting with a prepared statement about the community's long tradition of shared lake stewardship and her personal commitment to protecting what we've built here together. She made no direct mention of the quiet title action, the cease and desist, the sheriff's visit, or the license agreements I'd been circulating for 6 weeks. Then Norbert raised his hand during the open comment period. He stood up slowly, the way a man stands when he's been waiting to say something for a long time. "Can the board explain, for the record, which document gives the HOA legal authority over the lake and the shoreline?" Darlene began reciting the language of Section 14.7. Norbert said, "I didn't ask about the handbook. I asked about the recorded deed." The pavilion was very quiet. The lake lapped against the pilings. Patricia stood up. She identified herself as counsel for the Callaway Family Trust. She asked for 5 minutes to present documentation. Darlene objected. Approximately 8 people in the crowd told Darlene, with varying degrees of politeness, to let her speak. Patricia walked to the front of the pavilion and unrolled the plat map across the folding table. 1,847 feet of shoreline, clearly labeled in my grandfather's era draftsmanship. Lot 0, retained by grantor, Callaway Family Trust, not for conveyance. She walked through the deed chain in 4 minutes flat. Clean, factual, no flourishes. She read the CC&R line aloud slowly. Lake access provided courtesy of the Callaway Family Trust. She pointed out that 64 years of consecutive property tax records were publicly accessible documents and could be pulled up tonight, on any phone, through the county assessor's website, by anyone in the room who wanted to verify it themselves. Then I stood up and opened the box. I had printed 112 packets, one for every resident present. Each packet held a copy of the plat map, a condensed deed chain summary, a summary of the tax record history, a copy of the cease and desist letter, and one final document on top, the Harmon Lake Community Charter. I walked the packets to the front row. People passed them back. The pavilion was quiet except for the sound of paper shuffling and the low hum of insects in the pines. Then I spoke. 6 years ago, a permit program was created to collect fees for access to this shoreline. The program generated $34,220. The HOA had no legal authority to collect that money, because this shoreline has been owned by my family's trust since before most of you moved here. That money needs to come back. Darlene said, loudly, that I was engaged in a hostile takeover and that the documents were being misrepresented. Patricia said, without raising her voice. We'd welcome the HOA's attorney to produce any document giving the HOA authority over Lot 0 at any time this evening. 3 rows back, Grover Pratt looked at the floor and said nothing. I spoke again, and I kept it simple. I'm not here to take anything from anyone. The last page of your packet is the Harmon Lake Community Charter. It gives every resident and their guests permanent, free, unrestricted access to this shoreline. No permits, no fees, no exceptions, forever. All it asks is that you acknowledge what the plat map has shown for 64 years. Then I unfolded one more document. The Callaway Trust is also making a $25,000 donation to fund annual water quality testing for Harmon Lake and to establish the Clearwater Pines Junior Sailing Program, beginning this fall. For a moment, you could hear the lake. Then someone started clapping. Then about 40 people joined in. Darlene sat down. Grover Pratt leaned toward her and said something quietly. She didn't respond. The board voted 40 minutes later to formally dissolve the Lake Access Permit Program. 3-1. Darlene abstained. The full refund process took 6 weeks. Patricia worked with the HOA's incoming treasurer. Paul had resigned the week after the meeting, apparently having decided that proximity to Darlene was no longer worth the clipboard. To identify every permit fee collected over the 6-year life of the program, $34,220, distributed in checks to 312 households. Some of those residents had moved away years earlier and had to be tracked down by forwarding address. Every single one of them got their check. A few residents told me they felt embarrassed they'd never questioned the program. I told them there was nothing embarrassing about trusting someone who presents herself as an authority. The embarrassing part belonged to the person who had used that trust as a revenue stream. Darlene resigned as HOA president the week after the meeting. A single-line email to the board. She put her house on the market 2 months later. By the following spring, she was gone from Clearwater Pines. I don't know where she went, and I didn't ask. I never gloated. I mean that. I didn't post about it online. I didn't bring it up at neighborhood gatherings. And when people wanted to talk about it, I tried to move the conversation toward what came next. What came next was good. The Harmon Lake Community Charter was eventually signed by 186 of the 200 households in Clearwater Pines, the highest participation rate any community initiative had ever achieved in the subdivision's history. The charter established a simple, informal lake stewardship committee, open to any resident, which would meet twice a year to discuss water quality, wildlife, and general lake health. No dues, no permits, no Darlene. The quiet title proceeding was concluded by court order in November, formally confirming the Callaway Family Trust's ownership of Lot 0 on the permanent public record. It's there now, documented and settled, in case anyone ever needs to look it up. Warren the surveyor filed his final boundary report with the county. The 43 orange flags came down once the court order was recorded. The shoreline looked the same as it always had, pines running to the water, docks sitting quiet in the late fall, except now the paperwork matched the reality. The junior sailing program launched the last week of September. 12 kids enrolled in the first session. Maya helped me run the Saturday classes. Watching her teach a 10-year-old how to tack into the wind on a clear fall morning, the pines going gold at the edges, the lake flat and cold and perfect, was one of the better things I've seen in my adult life. Earl Callaway, wherever he is, would have approved. The following 4th of July, my friends came back. Same dock, same kids, a year older, an inch taller, more confident on the water. Same kayaks, Same floating platform, same cannonballs. We grilled on the porch and watched the fireworks come up over the ridge. Nobody arrived in a golf cart. Nobody asked to see a permit. The mergansers were back too, mother and a new batch of ducklings, moving in their quiet, purposeful line along the south shore, right through Lot 0, and never once checking whether they had authorization. My grandfather kept that shoreline for a reason. I'm still not entirely sure what it was. Maybe it was practicality, maybe sentiment, maybe just the instinct of a careful man holding something worth holding. But I know what it became, the thing that kept the lake free. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that treated the rules like a weapon, or someone who mistook a position for a right, tell me about it in the comments. I want to hear how it went, whether you fought back or wished you had. And if you're not subscribed yet, this channel is where the underdogs with the right paperwork win. Hit that button, because next time, we're talking about a man who got fined for parking in his own driveway and ended up owning the road.
What actually brought Darlene down wasn't the lawsuit or the attorney. It was simpler. She had never once read the documents, not the deed, not the plat, not even her own community CCNRs, which had the answer sitting in plain English for 50 years. She mistook unchallenged contract for legal ownership, built a revenue stream on that assumption, and never questioned it. That's cost the community $34,000 and cost her everything she's built in that neighborhood. Real advantage wasn't money or connection. It was preparation and patience. He knew the lands because he was trained to read it, and because he cared enough to actually understand it. Records beat volume, documentation with confidence, quiet beat loud, every single time. The practical takeaway: if anyone, an HOA, a property manager, a neighbor, is charging you fees based on authorities they can back up, ask for the document. Every time, just ask for the deed. The ending: free Shoreline for 200 families, clean water, kids learning to sail. That's what happens when the right person uses their knowledge for something bigger than revenge. If you ever file an HOA or someone who weaponized the rules, drop your story in the comments. You might end up on this channel. Not surprised that, hit that button. Next week, we're covering a man who got fined for parking in his own driveway and ended up owning the road. Even better than this one.